Morning, everybody. So we are on to Chapter 9, Answers in the Tree Fort of the Dreamsnatcher. The fort didn't look much from the outside, just some slats of wood within the gnarled branches of a yew, but it was big enough to stand up and walk around in, and it was notoriously hard to get to, so Moll and Siddy could store any number of disgusting and strange things up there without being told off. Kept in old jam jars and labelled by Siddy with a series of misspelt words, these forest secrets included funny-looking mushrooms, hopefully poisonous, old ferns make you sick if you eat them, giant nettles, the ones Mushy uses in gross soup, smooth pebbles, good for catapulting annoying people. Siddy had hung wind chimes from the branch beneath the fort to ward off evil spirits, and a week later Moll had added a dream catcher. The bright feathers might put the evil spirit in a better mood if it does chance on passing our way, she'd said. Moll sat back against the slats, her eyes glassy with tears and her thoughts pushing down on her. Oak had left reluctantly when she shouted down that she didn't want to see him ever again. But that was hours ago. It was mid-afternoon now, and still Moll hadn't moved. Oak's words were still ringing in her ears. She'd had parents, proper, real parents who had been the guardians of the oracle bones, but somehow Skull had taken them from her. Her face darkened. There was a knock on the door, and Moll jumped. Perhaps it was Oak's son, Domino, come down from his watch to check on her. She rubbed her eyes and clenched her teeth. "Who is it?" she growled. "It's me, Siddy." If it had been anyone else, Moll wouldn't have moved, but it was Siddy, so she shuffled forward and locked the door. Siddy crawled inside the tree fort, lay Porridge the second down on the floorboards, and cleared a space for himself among the jam jars. Opposite Moll, rummaging in his pockets, he pulled out a handful of Moll's favourite treats, elderflower fritters. He held them out to her. "I didn't dunk them in honey this time because Ma said she'd have to clean my pocket. And anyway, it would be a safety hazard for Porridge the second, as he does spend a lot of time in there." But Moll's teeth were clamped shut and her eyes were slit. "I had parents, Sid. Only Oak and Mushy never told me, and I never got to meet them." Siddy took off his flat cap and hung his head. "I just spoke to Oak. He told me because he's worried sick about you, and he knew you'd talk to me." He paused. "Mushy's worried too, Moll. All the elders are." "Good," Moll muttered. Her eyes misted with tears again, so she picked up an elderflower fritter and nibbled the end. Siddy leant towards her. "I know stuff, Moll. Oak wanted you to know, but he knew you wouldn't let him in here, so he told me about how they died." It was only a whisper, but Siddy's words clamoured in Moll's ears. Siddy knew the truth. "I'm going to tell you everything I know, Moll, and together we're going to fix this." Moll fiddled with the jar of tadpoles, then she nodded. "What happened to them? I need to know." "Before I tell you, Oak wanted you to know that your parents loved you more than any Ma or Pa could. He said you were their everything." Moll swallowed. She had been wanted and loved, and yet knowing that had come too late. Siddy took a deep breath. 10 years ago, your parents went to Skull's camp and spoke against his dark magic. Moll looked up. "They went to Skull's camp like I did?" Siddy nodded, but Skull wouldn't listen. And every night after they visited his clearing, the dream snatch haunted them, just like it haunts you, apparently. Oak told me Skull wanted the guardians of the oracle bones out of the way so that he had more of a chance of destroying the bone murmur. A lump was starting to form in Moll's throat again, as if all this unhappiness had been locked inside her and was suddenly struggling to get out. Apparently, the dream snatch grew so strong it spread over everything your parents held dear, and then one winter's night it dragged them and you out of bed and down to the river. You were just a scrap then, only 2 years old, I think. A chord within Moll wavered. Something about Siddy's words felt strangely familiar. They didn't come back from the river, did they? Siddy shook his head. The camp heard nothing, no cries, no cause for alarm. But when your parents didn't show up the next morning, Oak went down to the river and saw them on the bank. There were no marks on their bodies, but Oak could see they weren't breathing, that they were... His voice trailed off. Moll gulped. The faceless couple in a nightmare, the ones her mind refused to remember? She shivered. "My nightmare? It's the memory of me watching my parents die, isn't it?" Siddy shifted. "I think it might be." Moll's eyes widened in horror. But didn't anyone go after Skull? Siddy shook his head. Oak couldn't prove Skull was behind it, and it was too dangerous for the camp to stir up trouble without proof. Especially as Oak wanted to protect you. Moll stood up and paced to the end of the fort. But the dream snatch only summons the victims, she stammered. Even if Skull summoned my parents' clothes, he must have used something else to kill them. How could Skull do that without leaving any marks? Siddy shrugged. Stuff of dark magic, that's what Oak said, but he doesn't know any more than that. Even the elders couldn't work it out. Moll frowned. You said I was with them. How did I wriggle my way out? If Skull had the power to take my ma and pa away, why didn't he take me too? Sid paused. It was Griff. He saved your life that night. Griff? Moll felt her way back to the Wildcat's touch. Warm, strong, fearless. 10 years he'd been with her, and he'd never allowed her to touch him. But now everything was changing. Siddy nodded. The night Oak discovered your parents, he saw Griff for the first time, crouched among the undergrowth near the river. He was, and he had you there with him, safe. He must have led you away, hidden you in the ferns. Moll sat down before Siddy, wide-eyed and speechless. Griff had left the northern wilderness for her. He must have raced over mountains and bounded through valleys just to get to her. But how had he known the moment she would need him? Somehow he had known, and he'd known exactly who she was. Moll listened to the wind chimes tinkling on the branch below the fort. Griff had come from the wild. And maybe some things about him would always stay wild. Siddy shuffled awkwardly among the jam jars. He picked up Porridge II, who shot him a look of miserable indifference. Then he turned to Moll. I'm sorry about everything, Moll. About the dream snatch, the bone murmur, and about your parents. But there was something more than just sadness and anger in Moll's face now. There was a determination there. Out of the corner of his eye, Siddy glimpsed the penknife he kept on the shelf. He pocketed it quickly, unsure at this stage where Moll's determination would be directed. Hacking down the tree fort had probably crossed her mind by now. We need a plan, Sid. Moll said. Skull's not going to get away with taking my parents from me. Siddy nodded, relieved the tree fort was to be spared. Demolition. The bone murmur talks about you and Griff finding these amulets of truth. That's the only thing that can stop Skull. Now, at first, when Oak told me about the bone murmur, I thought an amulet was a type of fish. Moll grinned. That's a mullet, Sid. He nodded. Right. So I asked Ma, and she said amulets can be a number of things. Coins, necklaces, statues, pendants. He turned his flat cap over in his hand. She said there are wild stories claiming that amulets are jewels from the ends of the earth and fragments from shooting stars. Moll's eyes glittered green. Even Porridge II had an unusually thoughtful look on his face. I'll help you find them all. I'm good at finding things. Found a tawny owl's nest yesterday, I did. Moll thought of the things she'd found the night before. The dead owl and the rat, the gang circling the fire in cloaks. Skull squeezing the wax figure. She shivered. Somewhere in the deep wood that night, Skull would be conjuring his dream snatch. Siddy bit his lip. Pa said that past bone readings tell of the old magic locked inside the amulets, and if the amulets are destroyed, they're lost forever. The bone murmur breaks and Skull's dark magic grows. He hung his head. This is going to take ages. Perhaps we should hide out in the tree fort until it's all over. Moll shook her head. We have to fight back, just like my parents did. Siddy nodded glumly, and then his eyes sparkled as he remembered something. Oak told me that your parents threw the oracle bones just days before they died. Your pa asked where the amulets were hidden, but unlike many of the guardians of the past, he got an answer to this question. Oak said he read out a riddle, and though they say it's near impossible to make sense of, we've got a lead, because they say the bones never lie. Moll's heart beat faster. What's the riddle? What did my pa's bone reading say? I don't know. It's locked inside the chest of no opening at any time where your life won't be living, in Cinderella Bull's wagon, with the bone readings of the past. That's what's locked inside the chest. Moll's face was aghast. They'd spent hours trying to guess what Cinderella Bull had hidden away in the chest she didn't allow anyone else to touch. But ancient bone readings? They hadn't thought of that. Siddy nodded, and I always thought she kept a giant hedgehog in there. Obviously. Moll put her head in her hands. How are you ever going to sneak it out? Oak said he'd show it to you tomorrow morning after Wisdom and Ivy's wedding feast. It's out of the way. Moll let Oak's name bounce right off her. He was a liar, and she wouldn't be hanging around waiting for him to show her the bone reading. No, she'd get it herself as she had to do that night. She turned to Siddy. What did my ma go asking the bones? Oak says no one knows what she asked because she destroyed the bones after reading them. An icy chill crawled down Moll's back, and in the furthest corner of her mind the dream snatch began to pulse. Moll's stomach tightened and her face drained of colour. She could hear the hiss of the rattle and the beat of the drum. She gripped her talisman hard. Oh, I can feel the skull chanting for me. He must be stronger now he knows who I am. He's reaching while I'm awake. The forest around them fell silent until all that remained were Moll and Siddy's fluttering breaths. Siddy clutched his talisman, a circular pebble with a hole in the middle, which brought him more bad luck than good. He got his finger stuck in the hole when tree climbing a few days earlier, and it had snagged on a fence while he and Moll fled from the farmer the month before. But he'd grown attached to the thing, and he'd gripped it until his fingers were white. Then he plunged his hand inside an old sack, brought out a handful of oats, and scattered them over the floor. Keep us safe, tree spirits, he whispered, keep us safe. But the oats weren't strong enough to force Skull back, and Moll felt his call, urging her to give up, to hand herself over to his gang. She turned to Siddy. Tell me something good, Sid, something that'll close my mind right off to Skull. Sid bit his lip and then said, Olive. That was your ma's name, and your pa, he was called Ferry. And just like that, something inside Moll stirred, something stronger and bigger than Skull's dream snatch. His curse dissolved into silence, and Moll clenched her fists. She thought of her parents visiting Skull's clearing all those years ago. She thought of Griff's touch, so warm and strong. I'll find out how Skull killed my parents, she muttered. He may have owned their minds, but he's not owning me. No one owns me. And that's the end of your chapter. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a lovely time in the sunshine.